Today I'll be presenting a project that we've been working on that was supported by the CloudResearch funding. Thank you for that. The topic is about reference points and decision making. We conducted replication and extensions of a classic article by Dinner et al. In 2011. We conducted the study as a registered report, which means that we wrote a pre-registration, very detailed, and submitted this to this revolutionary platform called Peer Community in Registered Reports, where recommenders and reviewers go over a publicly posted preprint. And in this case, Chris Chambers made the recommendation based on reviews by 3 judgment decision-making open science researchers. And as you can see here, the preprint is publicly available and you can go and read it. And the URL on the top is where the recommendation is posted together with peer review. When we look at the literature, we look at the meta-analysis, we see defaults to be one of the strongest nudges out there. We've got Cohen's d of 0.62 to Cohen's d of 0.68. But then as a response, a lot of criticism came out showing publication bias. And when you adjust for publication bias, it seems like the effects are much more moderate or even completely disappear. So what is this specific target article about? This is the paper 2011. It's about partitioning default effects when people choose not to choose. So what they found was that the percentage of people choosing the ink bulb was a lot higher when ink bulb was the default in a choice between ink bulb and CFL. But since then, when we looked at the article and really started to analyze this, we realized this is not really about default. It actually is more about status quo bias, because when we think about defaults, the way that defaults were manipulated is by where this dot is set. So you have 2 choices and then one of them is already pre-filled for you. But the way that they manipulated things in this article was not that. It was something different about status quo effect. And here's what they described is that bulb types have been installed, pre-installed. Therefore, but they become the de facto default. So what we decided to do here is, rather than fighting over what is the right framing for the effect, we're just going to look at both of those. We're going to look at both default effect and status quo effect, and we're going to also introduce a control condition where there is no status quo, or a control condition where there is no default, which allows us to contrast and replicate the original. What are the findings? The findings are as follows. This is the dichotomous choice one. And as you can see, we found support for both status quo bias and for default effect. Yeah, it's interesting that lead seems to be much preferred over CFL. So people are moving, and people are, at least with our sample, very conscious of the environment. But if you set the defaults to not be lead, but to be to CFL or the status quo, then it seems like people will tend to choose more of CFL over lead. We also had the preference, so the continuous measure between -100 and 100, and very similar findings, but the effect for default was weaker. So status quo still prevailed and was supported. In terms of correlations and looking at the different mechanisms, we see here the direct implied, the indirect implied endorsement, and perceived effort. It seems like for status quo, there is higher direct implied endorsements and lower perceived effort. So if status quo is already the pre-existing condition, then there's less effort involved in changing from that. And because it's pre-installed, people just assume that this has been endorsed by whoever installed this and is doing the renovations for you. Our takeaways from this is that this is a successful replication, definitely in terms of status quo effect. We need to think very carefully about how we talk about status quo and default biases, or in general in action effects. But regardless, it's always good to try and manipulate both of these, to look at these together. And our evidence suggests that at the very least, this is additive. So we can get the benefits both from status quo effect and default effects. Status quo is associated with higher perceived endorsements and lower perceived effort. And this has relevance. Default effect and status quo bias can help with environmental decisions like choosing a more environmentally friendly light bulb. If you want more information about our team or about anything regarding this project, you're welcome to visit my website or contact me directly. Thank you.